So if you're a WNBA player, and believe me, I've coached the best. So what kind of impact is this rookie class having in the WNBA?
How do you think Clark is handling this?
I think she's handling great. I think she talks a lot of and she gets a lot of back. So she deserves everything she gets because she gives it as good as she gets it. She's just not built for the physicality of this league. So there's a lot of learning curve. But for these ridiculous fans who had her slotted as the next Diana now, they're out of their mind. Okay, so the kid was set up for failure right from the beginning.
The roar of a sold-out arena, the flick of a wrist from 30 feet, the swish of a net that sounds like a punctuation mark. In women's basketball, moments of seismic change have often been loud, celebrated with confetti and cutting down nets. But the most profound shift in the sport's history arrived not with a roar, but with a quiet, calculated refusal, a no that echoed louder than any victory chant. This is not a story about a rivalry played out on hardwood. It is not about trash talk, technical fouls, or heated post-game interviews. This is a story about authority, legacy, and the fragile nature of control. It is about how the most powerful figure in women's basketball history found his influence dissolving not through a defeat on the court, but through the silent, steadfast ascent of a player he never saw coming. This is the story of Caitlyn Clark and Geno Auriemma, a story where revenge was served not on a platter of public drama, but on a silver platter of cold, hard, undeniable results. For decades, the narrative of women's college basketball flowed through one pipeline, colored in husky blue. The University of Connecticut wasn't just a program, it was the program. A dynasty built by the relentless, exacting vision of Geno Auriemma. He didn't just win games. He authored a standard of excellence so high it seemed untouchable. He decided what greatness looked like, who embodied it, and how it should be achieved. To reach the pinnacle, you went through him. His program was the gatekeeper to immortality. Then came a kid from West Des Moines, Iowa, with a logo range jumper and a fearlessness that couldn't be coached. Caitlyn Clark's dream, like that of countless young girls, pointed towards stores. But when the moment for connection came, the phone never rang from the man himself. It was a quiet dismissal, a barely perceptible closing of a door that was presumed to be wide open. That moment, seemingly insignificant in the grand sweep of recruiting, became the first crack in the foundation. What followed was a masterclass in quiet power. Clark didn't protest, she didn't lobby, she simply went to Iowa and began to play a version of basketball that captivated a nation. She didn't just break records, she shattered the existing business model, the attention, economy, and the very geography of the sport's relevance. Arenas from New York to Los Angeles filled to see her. Ratings skyrocketed for her. A new, massive audience discovered women's basketball because of her. And from his throne, Auriemma watched. At first with dismissive commentary, then with subtle, backhanded praise, and fire.
This kid's on the wrong team. She's got the wrong skill set to handle the physicality of that league. And she's a rookie.
Finally, with a frustration that boiled over into public scorn for the new fans she brought, he was the master architect watching a skyscraper. He didn't design eclipse, his own monuments. He tried to frame her success as a product of the world he built, a wave simply catching a lucky rider. But the wave was hers alone. The culmination was a moment of profound irony. The gatekeeper, finding his own new venture, lacking the one thing that guaranteed relevance, extended a hand and a seven-figure check to the very star he'd once overlooked. He needed her star power to legitimize his next chapter. Her response was a silent, steady, unambiguous no. That refusal was the revolution. It wasn't announced with a manifesto or a press conference. It was communicated through action, through leverage, through the quiet confidence of one who knows her worth is not defined by the old guard's validation. Clark pulled the future toward her without ever raising her voice, exposing a fundamental truth. The power in women's basketball was no longer bestowed from the top down. It was generated from the ground up by the players and carried in the pockets of millions of new fans. This is the dissection of that power shift.
If you're a college player and you're a great college player, like Caitlyn was, the delusional fan base that follows her disrespected the WNBA players by saying she's going to go in that league and tear it apart.
12,000-word journey through the missed call, the record-breaking shots, the verbal jabs, the cultural quake, and the $1 million offer that was declined. It's a story of how revenge works best when it is cold, silent, and absolutely definitive. To understand the magnitude of the collision, one must first appreciate the empire. The University of Connecticut women's basketball program under Geno Auriemma isn't merely successful, it is a self-sustaining universe of victory. Since his arrival in 1985, Auriemma constructed not just a team, but a mythology. 11 national championships, a procession of icons, Rebecca Lobo, Diana Taurasi, Maya Moore, Breanna Stewart. These weren't just great players, they were apostles of a basketball gospel preached by Geno. They were tough, skilled, system perfect, and they won relentlessly. UConn became the destination. For any elite high school prospect with championship aspirations, the path seemed linear. Excel, attract UConn's interest, commit, become part of the machine, and leave with banners and a refined, professional-ready game. Auriemma, with his sharp wit, intimidating demeanor, and unparalleled eye for talent, wasn't just a coach. He was a curator of greatness. He held the keys. He decided who was UConn material. His approval was the ultimate currency. His system, the proven forge for greatness.
This rookie class isn't even one of the best rookie classes in the last 10 years. But they've been put out to be that because the way social media is today.
This environment bred a specific, understandable confidence, a confidence that could, at its edges, curdle into a sense of invulnerability. When you've been right so often, for so long, the assumption that you will continue to be right becomes a reflex. The system is infallible because you built it. The future stars will come to you because they always have. This was the psychological landscape when a lanky, audacious guard from Iowa began generating national buzz. Caitlyn Clark's game was a viral sensation before she ever played a college minute. YouTube clips showed a teenager pulling up from the center court logo with ease, firing no-look passes through traffic, playing with a swagger that was less arrogance and more pure, unadulterated joy. She was a showman and a savant. To fans and media, she looked like a transformative talent. To the recruiting world, she was a 5-star can't-miss prospect. Logic dictated that UConn, the perennial collector of such talent, would be deeply involved. But the connection never sparked. By Clark's own account, communication from stores was perfunctory at best. The interest was tepid, channeled through her AAU coach. There was no direct outreach from the legend himself. No phone call from Geno Auriemma to Caitlyn Clark. No conversation with her parents. In the high-stakes, relationship-driven world of elite recruiting, this silence was deafening. It was a message, clear and discreet. You are not a priority. The reasons, when later inferred or stated, varied. The official line was one of roster logistics. UConn had already secured a commitment from Paige Buchers, another generational point guard prospect in the same class.
Who would have thought that all those years ago, back in Des Moines, Iowa, that this would be the case right now? We knew what we had in Caitlyn back in Iowa City, and we knew the attention that she was bringing around the Big Ten and collegiate basketball. But I didn't know how that was going to transcend into the WNBA. And obviously we can see that it's done pretty darn well, and people are excited to see her play at every level.
Taking two ball-dominant guards was seen as a potential conflict. On its face, a reasonable, basketball-specific decision. But then came the edge, the glimpse into the dynasty's mindset. Auriemma, in later recounting, suggested that if Clark had truly wanted to come to UConn, the onus was on her to pursue him. She should have called me, was the essence of the sentiment. Let that paradigm sink in. A teenage prospect, even one as gifted as Clark, was expected to chase down the most powerful coach in the sport. It was a complete inversion of the modern recruiting dynamic, a throwback to an era where the privilege of playing for a legend was pursuit enough. It communicated a towering sense of institutional self-regard. UConn wasn't just another option, it was the zenith. The mountain would not come to Muhammad. For Clark, a player whose confidence was as intrinsic as her passing vision, this was more than a snub. It was a foundational assessment. It told her that in the eyes of the standard-bearer, she did not fit the mold. Her flamboyant, deep-range, risk-embracing style might have been seen as undisciplined antithetical to the controlled, systematic excellence of UConn. She was an outlier, and the dynasty, in its comfort, had no immediate need for outliers. So, the door that so many assumed would be wide open, gently, firmly clicked shut. It was a decision made from a position of absolute strength, a minor roster calculation, and a long history of triumphant calculations. Auriemma moved on, likely without a second thought. The machine would continue. He had his point guard of the future in Buchers. The universe was in order. But in that dismissal, in that failure to recognize the unique seismic potential of Caitlyn Clark, Geno Auriemma committed what would become the most consequential misjudgment of his career. He wasn't just passing on a player. He was closing the door on the future itself, a future that would soon knock with a force he could never have anticipated. The door closed in stores, and in Iowa City, a window to a new world swung wide.
Okay, this kid's coming into the league, and Diana said it best. This kid's in for a rude awakening.
Open. Iowa was not UConn. It carried no dynasty baggage, no roomful of national championship trophies. Under coach Lisa Bluter, it was a respected, often excellent program, but it existed in a different stratum, one of perennial hopefuls, not perennial champions. For Caitlyn Clark, that wasn't a drawback. It was the perfect canvas. At Iowa, she wouldn't be a piece in a prefabricated masterpiece. She would be the architect. She was granted the ultimate trust, the freedom to be fully, unabashedly herself. The system would be built around her transcendent talent, not the other way around. This was the critical divergence. UConn offered a legacy to join. Iowa offered a legacy to create. The impact was immediate and visceral. Carver Hawkeye Arena, once reliably half full for many games, began to pulse with a new energy. Word spread. You had to see this freshman play. She wasn't just scoring, she was orchestrating events. Deep three-pointers launched from distances that defied coaching manuals. Cross-court passes that seemed telepathic. A competitive fire that burned white-hot. Clark played with the joy of a kid on a playground and the precision of a chess master. Social media became her megaphone. Her highlights weren't just clips, they were cultural artifacts, shared by millions who knew nothing about women's basketball but recognized undeniable magnetism. The logo Clark shot became a trademark. Each game was an event, a must-watch phenomenon. She was doing something radical. She was making women's college basketball the coolest ticket in sports. The numbers told an irrefutable story. Sellouts became the norm, not the exception. When Iowa went on the road, they didn't just visit opponents, they invaded them. Arenas packed with a mix of home fans and thousands of...
There were actually odds on she's third or fourth in betting odds on being MVP at a WNBA.
Clark converts, many wearing her No. 22 jersey in hostile colors. Television networks took notice. Games featuring Iowa saw ratings spike dramatically. A sport that had long fought for mainstream attention found itself with a breakout, must-see star driving unprecedented viewership. Clark shattered records with a casual ferocity. She became the all-time leading scorer in NCAA Division I history. Male or female, a statistic so staggering it transcended the sport. But her impact was never just statistical. It was emotional, cultural. Young girls across the country weren't just dreaming of playing basketball. They were dreaming of pulling up from the logo like Caitlyn. Boys who had never watched a women's game were memorizing her stats. She was creating a new demographic of fan, one drawn by sheer athletic spectacle and charismatic force of personality. While this revolution was unfolding in the American heartland, in stores, the traditional empire continued its operations. UConn was still brilliant, still championship caliber, still producing elite talent, but a subtle shift was occurring in the sports atmosphere. The media cyclone, the fan frenzy, the cultural buzz, it was increasingly centered on Iowa City. The spotlight, which had for so long been fixed on Geno Auriemma and his Huskies, was drifting. It was now tracking a sophomore, then a junior from Iowa. Auriemma, a master of narrative and psychology, could not have missed this. His comments during this period began to reveal a tension. When asked about Clark, he would offer praise, but often laced with a qualifier. He called her fearless, likened her play to a kid in the driveway. On the surface, complimentary, underneath, a subtle diminishment. It framed her genius as instinctual, almost accidental, rather than the product of relentless work and basketball IQ. It contrasted with the way he spoke about his own players, like Buckers, whose greatness was always contextualized within discipline, system, and doing things the right way. He could not seem to offer a full-throated, unequivocal endorsement. Every compliment seemed to require an anchor, a tether, back to his own world. If Clark's passing was praised, he'd note that Bucher's was a great passer too. If her scoring was phenomenal, he'd remind people that scorers come and go. It was the language of a king feeling the first tremors of a challenge to his realm, attempting to maintain the frame through which all greatness must be viewed. The unspoken message was clear. What she is doing is entertaining, but it is not the brand of sustained championship excellence we have built here. He was defending not just a program, but an entire philosophy of the game. Meanwhile, Clark's philosophy, one of transcendent individual talent-driving collective belief, was capturing the imagination of the sporting world. The two paradigms were on a collision course, not just for championships, but for the soul of the sport's future. As Clark's stardom reached supernova levels during her junior and senior years, the tone from the UConn camp evolved from subtly qualified praise to something sharper. The frustration of watching an external force rewrite the rules of engagement began to seep through. Auriemma's comments, always measured in delivery, started to carry more bite. He grew increasingly vocal about the hype and the narrative, often positioning himself as the sober realist in the sea of Clark-induced mania. This reached its zenith in the summer of 2024, after Clark had been drafted first overall by the Indiana Fever and was beginning her WNBA career. The buzz was deafening. Betting markets.
These people are so disrespectful and so unknowledgeable and so stupid that it gives women's basketball a bad name.
Reflecting fan sentiment, listed Clark among the favorites for the WNBA MVP award, an unheard of proposition for a rookie. The new fans she brought, full of optimistic fervor, openly speculated about her immediate dominance. For Auriemma, this was a bridge too far. It wasn't just an overestimation of a rookie. It was an affront to the entire professional league he respected, a league populated by veterans who had paid their dues. In an interview on The Dan Patrick Show, the mask of wry commentary fully slipped. His target shifted from Clark herself to the ecosystem of support around her. He unleashed on her fan base, labeling them disrespectful, unknowledgeable, and in a moment of stunning condescension, so stupid that it gives women's basketball a bad name. He framed their belief in Clark's immediate MVP potential as an insult to the established WNBA stars, a product of ignorant hype over substance. It was a shocking, deeply personal broadside. This wasn't basketball analysis. It was cultural gatekeeping of the ugliest kind. The Hall of Fame coach was essentially telling millions of new, passionate fans that they didn't belong, that their enthusiasm was toxic, that they were stupid for believing in the player who had drawn them in. The backlash was swift and severe. Media critics, fellow coaches, and fans across the spectrum called the comments elitist, bitter, and damaging to the very sport he claimed to protect. It painted Auriemma not as a protective elder statesman, but as a figure threatened by change, lashing out at the source of his displacement. But the most devastating response came not from Twitter or sports talk radio. It came silently from Caitlyn Clark on the basketball court. Her rookie WNBA season was a study in overcoming adversity. She faced relentless physical defense, constant double teams, and the immense pressure of historic expectations. She struggled at times, as all rookies do, but she also thrived. She hit iconic game winners. She delivered breathtaking passes. She led the league in assists and shattered the rookie record for three-pointers. She dragged a struggling Fever team into playoff contention. She played every game through bumps and bruises, earning the respect of veterans through her toughness and work ethic. When the season ended, the awards were announced. Caitlyn Clark was unanimously named the WNBA Rookie of the Year. She was selected to the All-WNBA First Team. And in the MVP voting, the final poetic twist, she finished in 4th place. Exactly where those unknowledgeable, stupid fans had predicted months earlier. The narrative boomerang was complete. The fans he had insulted were proven not just passionate, but prescient. Clark's performance validated their belief, not in blind hype, but in observable, record-breaking talent. Auriemma's attempt to position himself as the arbiter of reality had spectacularly backfired. His credibility, at least on the subject of Caitlyn Clark, was in tatters. The gatekeeper had been shown that the gates were now open, and the crowd flooding in knew exactly what they were seeing. For Clark, there was no public rebuttal. No, I told you so. Her response was her game. Her revenge was the stat sheet. It was a silent, magnificent proof of concept. She had taken his criticism, absorbed the pressure, and delivered a rookie season so statistically and culturally significant that it rendered his words hollow. The power of the moment lay in its quiet conclusiveness. She didn't need to argue. The results argued for her. In the aftermath of the rookie season vindication, the dynamics were set in stone. Clark was the undisputed present and future of the sport's marketability. Auriemma, while still a legendary coach, was increasingly seen as a figure from a past era, one struggling to reconcile with the new world order. But the final, most symbolic act of this power transfer was yet to come. A new venture was brewing in the women's basketball landscape, the Unrivaled League. Co-founded by WNBA stars Breanna Stewart and Nafisa Collier, it was envisioned as a high-profile off-season 3-on-3 league showcasing the game's top talent. It had serious backing, serious ambition, and a serious need for a headline act to cut through the noise and attract immediate attention. Geno Auriemma was deeply involved as an advisor and invested figurehead. His presence lent the league institutional credibility, a bridge to the college game's history. But in the modern media economy, history doesn't sell subscriptions or drive ticket sales. Star power does. And there was one star whose power operated on a different celestial plane. The league needed Caitlyn Clark, not as a participant, but as a centerpiece. Her involvement would guarantee media coverage, sponsorships, and most importantly, the eyes of her millions of fans. Without her, it was an interesting experiment for hardcore fans. With her, it could be a mainstream phenomenon. And so, the ultimate pivot arrived. The coach who never made the recruiting call, who spent years offering backhanded praise and outright criticism, who insulted her supporters, now had to pick up the phone. Reports confirmed that Unrivaled presented Clark with an offer worth well over $1 million for just 8 weeks of play. It was one of the most lucrative short-term deals ever offered a women's basketball player. The irony was so thick it was almost theatrical. Here was Geno Auriemma, the man who once believed Clark should have called him for a scholarship, now leading the charge to offer her a king's ransom for her time. The same man who dismissed the commercial hype was now trying to monetize it directly. The critic was now the supplicant. The gatekeeper was now holding the gate open, hoping she would deign to walk through. For Clark and her team, the offer was more than a contract. It was a character test. Accepting it would mean entering a business relationship with her most prominent skeptic, lending her hard-earned credibility to a venture he was championing. It would, in some ways, allow him to finally claim a piece of her narrative, to frame her success as something that could be channeled through a platform he helped build. It would be a form of reconciliation and validation on his terms. Her decision was swift and decisive. She declined. There was no fiery statement, no leaked gossip about negotiations, just a polite, firm, no thank you. The silence surrounding her rejection was louder than any press release could have been. It was a declaration of independence so complete it shook the foundations of the sport's old power structure. The implications were profound. First, it demonstrated Clark's staggering leverage. She could walk away from a life-changing sum because her value and options elsewhere in the WNBA, with other endorsements and building her own brand, were even greater. She didn't need Unrivaled's money or platform. Second, it exposed the fragility of ventures built on old models of authority. Without Clark, the Unrivaled League's buzz noticeably dimmed. The question on everyone's mind was laid bare. What's the point without her? Most importantly, it was the final, silent rebuttal. In turning down Auriemma's offer, Clark wasn't just making a business decision. She was closing the circle that began with his unanswered recruiting call years prior. She was saying, definitively, that she did not need his approval, his platform, or his money. Her kingdom was...
I wanted UConn to recruit me. I always wanted Geno to call me just because he's Geno. Like, he's one of the best coaches of all time. Geno never called me. I have a chance to beat UConn on the biggest stage in front of 14.2 million people. Obviously, I was licking my chops a little bit.
Self-built. The student had not just surpassed the master, she had rendered his final attempt at relevance unnecessary. For Auriemma, it was a devastating public confirmation of his diminished sway. The ultimate symbol of control, the ability to attract the best talent with the lure of his system, had evaporated. The best talent had built her own system, and she wasn't interested in his. The $1 million offer, meant to be a symbol of his forward-thinking vision and pull, became instead the receipt for his own miscalculation, framed in silent decline. The story of Caitlyn Clark and Geno Auriemma is far more than a sports feud. It is a case study in the silent transfer of power in the modern athletic era. It illustrates how authority, once concentrated in the hands of iconic coaches and entrenched institutions, can evaporate when a player achieves a direct, unmediated connection with a global audience. Clark's revenge was never vengeful, it was existential. She didn't set out to humble a legend. She set out to be the best basketball player she could be, to play the game she loved in the way that felt most authentic. In doing so, with such spectacular success, she inadvertently exposed the vulnerabilities of the old guard. Her power came not from a hierarchy, but from a network of fans, of social media followers, of casual viewers who found joy in her game. This kind of power is decentralized, organic, and incredibly difficult for traditional structures to control or claim credit for. Auriemma's mistake was fundamental. He misread Clark's unique appeal as a temporary fever, a viral moment, rather than a permanent shift in the sport's center of gravity. He believed the institutions, the programs, the coaches, the established media pathways would ultimately retain control of the narrative. He failed to see that Clark was becoming an institution unto herself. Her quiet no to his $1 million offer was the period at the end of the sentence. It signaled that the future of women's basketball will be negotiated directly between players of extraordinary influence and the opportunities that seek them. Coaches will always be vital, but the role of the omnipotent gatekeeper, the singular path to glory, is over. Players now hold the leverage of their own brands, cultivated in real time with a fan base that is loyal to them, not just to their school or team. The warning is clear for every executive, coach, and administrator in sports. You can no longer afford blind spots. The next transformative talent might not look or play like the legends of the past. They might not come through the traditional pipelines, and if you dismiss them, if you fail to recognize the shifting tides they represent, you risk being left behind, offering checks that will never be cashed to stars who no longer need your validation. Caitlyn Clark's legacy will be her scoring records, her highlight reels, and her role in popularizing the women's game to unprecedented heights. But perhaps her most enduring impact is this. She proved, without ever raising her voice, that the game belongs to the players. The power is earned on the court, but it is cemented in the quiet confidence to chart your own course and the strength to walk away from any table where you are not truly valued. The revolution wasn't televised. It was streamed, tweeted, and sold out. And its loudest statement was a silence that still echoes.